Right, I get to sit down for this next bit because we are going to go straight on to a fireside chat with Ross McNairn. So Ross McNairn is currently CEO of Wordsmith, ex-CTPO of TravelPerk, Skyscanner, and Let Go. Ross, do you want to join me on stage, wherever you are? Okay, thank you, Ross. Cool. So we are talking about generative AI and the CTO, right? Like everyone's talking about AI right now. What does the CTO need to know then? This is what we really want to get to. And I know he says you're CEO of Wordsmith, so this is a new company that you've just founded as well, right? That's around AI. So why don't you tell us a little bit about it and introduce yourself properly?
Okay, cool. So my background is I was actually a lawyer 20 years ago, something like that. I then moved over, I started a software company that was acquired by Skyscanner. I worked with Andrew Phillips, who's the CTO there, who's chatting after me, who's got a great talk I'm looking forward to. And then after that, various different things. I then moved on, was at TravelPerk for a few years, and about 6 months ago, I left TravelPerk and with a few other founders have started a new, very legally focused AI company, which is, it's going well. We're enjoying it a lot. I think it's tough. Like, what does a CTO need to know about AI like this? It's actually quite a weird topic to talk about because there's so much crap going around about it at the moment,
Yep.
and there's such a zeitgeist and such a trend and so overhyped. And I think there's so many poor use cases that are just the crazy engineer spitting out code, which is it's a very good point, I think, actually. And I would say I kind of bucket it into three big things that, at least the way I think about it, is that you get one bucket of things which is sort of engineering productivity, at least for us, which I'm probably the bit I'm most skeptical about.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. It's kind of helpful, the co-pilots on redoing integrations that other people have done before and things like that. But actually, there's some gains to be had, but there's also some big problems with people spitting out loads of boilerplate code. Mm-hmm. The second bucket is sort of new capabilities that sort of existed before, but have now been upgraded 10 times more. So anomaly detection, classification, all these sorts of things that you can build new features with. And then there's a third thing that I think people don't really talk about, which is much more profound in how it's going to affect what we have to do, which is the interface that people are using to communicate with computers.
Right.
So if you think like we had, in the world of the desktop, it would take you maybe 15, 20 minutes to go log in, go find something and get your information. Then mobile comes along and it's get out your phone and it's a minute to retrieve. Now with Gen AI and proper language interface, that could and will very quickly turn into just a few seconds. And each time you go through one of these big platform shifts, everything changes about how you build software around it. Right. So as profound as desktop to mobile moving on now, I think is a big step. So I think there's a lot of bits to unpick, and I think it's a super interesting topic.
So where are we on that journey? You said right at the start. It feels like we've been talking about it for a long time, and maybe it's just me, and it's not a popular opinion, but I'm already a bit bored of it, to be honest. Exactly. But so is it just the start of it? Is it going to change? Are we in the middle of it? What's really happening then?
I kind of hope that we are getting over the sort of everybody posting random rubbish about how they're the newest expert on it. Like the initial hype of zero understanding, this is something that someone posted and it's in the newspaper. I hope we're sort of getting to the end of the uneducated noise. Right. And I think the promising green shoots that now you're beginning to see a lot of companies and people who have now gone and invested serious time in filtering through some of the wheat from the chaff. Yeah. Going through. And I think that as they start to build up platforms, as they start to build up observability that will work in that world, as they start to bring in actual products and services that we can start to leverage, mm-hmm. I think you'll see the general making noise stuff will disappear, and we'll move into much more specific use cases and situations that people will start to use it for.
Right. I should say as well, do please ask your questions for Ross as we're here as well. I will keep an eye on the screen and keep them and feed them into the conversation as we go. In the app on Slido, just pose your questions anytime. I do find it interesting the way that you described it as kind of 3 pillars around it. And I've spoken to a lot of CTOs around AI, particularly over the last few months in podcasts and things. And most people tend to describe it to me as 2 pillars for starters. One is either it's the product itself and it's what you're building, or it's that productivity gain and it's working on the developers. So maybe if we just touch on those 3 and work through it. So the way that I've spoken about it and discussed it with people before is that it's not like it's going to replace the developer, it's not going to write the code for you, but if it can do some of that boilerplate stuff, it can speed up productivity or help the devs, then it takes a lot of the legwork away. Now, you said you were quite skeptical of actually how much gain that it really gives you. What do you think?
I think we'll get there. Look, a lot of people, there was this Devon automatic software agent thing, which you can, looks cool on the surface, then you look, there's a lot of people then going into deep teardowns of that stuff, and it's quite too much magic. Anybody who's been in engineering for a while, when you don't understand what's going on and there's too many steps that happen in between, it generally creates more problems down the road. And I think that one of the big things that is going to quickly happen now is that people will quickly start to really, I think, move back from just throwing Gen AI into their system on the productivity stuff. Right. And they'll be a lot more considered about exactly where they want to get the gains. So I think it'll be more in, automating the testing or automating various sections of this, but just throwing it across as a general auto-suggest. I don't know, I've had loads of conversations. I was having one with someone a couple of days ago. They're pulling a lot of that stuff out because it's causing unexpected side effects and standardization in ways they wouldn't want, and too much code being written here and there. And I think we'll see. It'll evolve a lot from where it is today.
I think one of my concerns with it is engineering really is creativity, right? And it's the artificial intelligence, the AI that we have now, it's not real intelligence. It's machine learning. It only knows what's already been created, and it's great at regurgitating and finding that stuff for you. But it can't creatively solve problems and do that thinking for you. So I worry about, I guess, the next generation of developers as well, and the juniors are what is it doing for them? Is it going to hinder their creativity? Does it take away the basics so that they can focus on more creativity? Where does it leave us as far as improving engineering?
I do think we will get big gains from it, productivity-wise. I think a good parallel is actually looking at law. Right. So if you look at the legal industry before the word processor, when everybody was doing it by paper, we actually had fewer lawyers per capita back then. And I think when you have something that has relatively elastic demand, like engineering, it's not like all the software that we want to be written has been written, or even close. The bottleneck is always what we can produce, really, at least for a very long time. So I suspect as you make the throughput quicker, and as you give people more gearing, like with the legal services and other things like this, you'll actually find that I think demand will probably increase quite a lot.
So interested actually in what you're doing then for the legal profession. You say it's mostly in legal services. What is it that you're adding then? What does your product do?
So one of the weirdest things when you move from an industry like law over into software engineering is that the fastest way to get rid of something that a software engineer, like a manual process, is ask an engineer just to do it manually 3 times, and it'll just evaporate pretty quickly. Right? Lawyers don't do that. Honestly, practicing as a lawyer was about 20% of the job is amazing, and 80% of it was just hell. So I think if the simplest way, there are a bunch of very specific use cases that we go after around automation, but we're effectively taking an engineering team and then throwing it in to build an operations platform that they can eliminate these low, high-volume tasks, and then they can sort of step themselves up to just working on the more relevant things.
Oh, interesting. So we do have some questions come in, and I am going to feed them in as we go. So first one, and I'm afraid I'm going to put my glasses on because it's way too far away for me to see properly. When integrating generative AI into a platform, how do you handle data privacy concerns from clients that their usage data is being used to train a model without detrimenting their experience? Now, from what I see of most people, they don't even think about that. It's like just going to throw all their data at a model, and you don't know where it's going or how they're controlling it.
That's an awesome question. Yeah, because actually, even with the talk before, observability becomes really difficult because the problem with a lot of this Gen AI stuff is that you stick it in, you get an answer, and just understanding what's going on between input output is really hard. You're constantly running this evaluation of this is what I want to see, and you can't really see how the data moves inside. There are some ways of doing it, but it's very complicated.
Yeah.
And specifically when you're dealing with production environments where your users are using their data and they don't want anybody looking at that. You know, it's so black box, it's actually very difficult to develop systems. So it's going to be one of the big challenges is I think a lot of people will very quickly just stick in place a Gen AI system. And a lot of products will then really struggle to move on quickly because they can't really do anything with that data to start to interpret. And every client that we speak to right now says, it's mine, I want it, you're not allowed to do anything with it. And so all of our focus is actually right now really on the tooling around it. And you're somewhat, to a degree, black boxed around how you can actually touch that data. So I think it's a good one, and yeah.
Yeah. I guess specifically with the hat of CTO as well, it's like their responsibilities in all of that and how they really unmask that black box and really understand it.
And moving it, I mean, just between Europe, the US, everything else like that, it's a complete nightmare. And I think we've taken the approach from the very beginning that you know we're going to have to pay certain parties for data to improve specific models, and your client's data is always going to have to be theirs because ultimately, you know, that is the new commodity now.
So we've got one as well, anonymous, and maybe it's potentially controversial, I guess, but highlighted. So what are your concerns about data privacy, sharing your data with AI tools? Do you trust current providers like OpenAI with their policies?
Yeah, I think that there are enterprise platforms and services that if you're paying them for, and if you've gone through the rigor, you can keep it relatively sequestered. Yeah. I think that all of the consumer stuff, you are the product. Yeah. So if you're like, this is with lawyers, if they just start dumping sensitive contracts into ChatGPT, that's obviously going to be used to train. And they have some toggles and dark UI patterns that you can go and switch it off. But, you know, again, if you're paying properly for something, you're probably going to be able to secure your data. If your team are just going wild on the internet and it's freemium.
Right. I would imagine lawyers would be much more cautious than
most. So would I, but then when you get into it, like...
Okay, let's the next one. A problem I see with Copilot tools is that it takes away from the mastery pillar for engineers. What new ways do we have to help motivate people?
Well, I think once the Copilot tools start to effectively do what they could be doing, which is taking away some of the boilerplate stuff, I think it changes the mastery. You know, it's like instead of using pen, you're now using a word processor. So your gearing just goes up. Your ability to have more outsized impact, which requires a different type of thinking. Mm-hmm.
And you're still discerning what it produces. Sure. You know, we've had a lot of engineers that have been experimenting with it, and what they find is, okay, it's generated all this code for me, it's done all this thing for me, but actually it still takes that the experience and the know-how to be able to say, well, that's a load of rubbish, or that doesn't do what I need it to.
I completely agree. Mm-hmm. But it's also why I make that distinction between where it is now and where it's hopefully going to get to, where it genuinely offers huge productivity gains. Yeah.
Which is where I say, for me, it comes back to that concern about what it does for less experienced engineers or juniors that can just take what it's given and trust it and then go run with it.
But there are new techniques, right, that are now emerging. So with this, there are a whole bunch of new different types of building RAG pipelines or doing various different types of architecture. With the big shift that's happening now with AI is that a lot of the smaller companies now are beginning to experiment with multi-agent approach. Okay. So up till now, most of the Gen AI things have sort of been like giving somebody a pen and asking them to just write an essay in one go, and they can't make any edits, right? And actually it's pretty good at doing that, surprisingly. But now you're starting to move into situations where you have one agent takes a question or whatever, decides on a strategy, invokes 3 or 4 other agents that are specialists, sequences them, and you're moving to a much, much, much more complicated situation where, and all of that's going to require, that's a whole new skill set that engineers are going to have to learn, and you're going to need people that can understand how to do that. And it's non-trivial. To do it in a simple sense, to get a RAG pipeline up and running can be done quickly, but to do it in production with everything else is, there's going to be a lot of work for software engineers.
Excellent. Interesting stuff.
I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay, so if that's talking about then that productivity pillar and the first of those, moving on to then the product itself and what you're actually doing that second stage. What's coming then? What are we looking for? How are people actually going to use it to get real business value? What should they be considering then as the businesses that they apply it? Yeah,
so I mean, there are some really, a lot of these like values that you can deploy in your current product are things that could have been done before, but the either expertise barrier or cost barrier or implementation barrier were just too high.
Right.
So things that it is excellent for that now are very simple to do, anomaly detection, classification, starting to do things that across, so I think there's a question there. I'm no longer at TravelPert, but when I was back there, 6-8 months ago, so they were starting to experiment with all sorts of things around classification in certain cases, like how you analyze emails,
right,
how you understand the sentiment, things of that nature. Where it's incredibly effective as well is search. So there's a huge spectrum. So you can do basic semantic search is now trivial, but getting into much more complicated hybrid versions of that to perform queries and analyses that never, well, engineering-wise, were incredibly difficult before. So, for example, something that we're working on now is a simple query like, let's say I've got a corpus of 5,000 documents or contracts, and somebody wants to know what percentage of the time do we have a liability above $1 million a year.
Right.
Like, on the surface, how do you even do that with, you have to go extract all of this data from them, understand ontologies. There's a whole bunch of things there that before Gen AI arrived would have been a big lift, right? Mm-hmm. And now it's significantly easier. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The top question there is one we get all the time, and I've literally seen it in so many clients where they'll walk straight in to the tech team and go, right, AI, it's everywhere, what do we do? What is it doing for us? How can we use it? Like, that's a hard position to be in as a CTO, is like people that, answering those questions for people that don't understand it, and I say it's not general intelligence, this is machine learning, it's patterns, it's everything else. There are a lot of people that know a little bit, and you've got to manage those expectations. How are you going to advise a CTO, I guess, to handle that kind of conversation with their CTO?
This is the bit that I hope goes away quite quickly, because, there's now, to a lot of people, like the Gen AI, hammer is here and everything is a nail. So there are still going to be 90%, especially today, of problems that existing technology is really great for. This is just a new tool that's been landed in our kit. Like, it's like getting a new spanner. You still have got the whole suite of other things that there are situations that a relational database is excellent for, and using a vector one, it just isn't the right use case.
Yeah, but if you call it AI, then everyone will think it's really cool. I think I saw an AI toothbrush online the other day.
Yeah, well, so maybe what you need to do is hire like a marketing person into engineering, and then they can wrap it appropriately.
Yeah. So is it about educating the rest of the business as to what it is and what it isn't? Do we want to draw that distinction between, look, this is not actual AI, it's machine, or is it just a word?
It's smart stakeholder management, probably gets you a very long way, as much as, and then I think there's a long burn of education that needs to take place step by step. But my genuine advice with it is there will almost certainly be one great use case for a spanner.
No.
In your business. And actually, I think it's a really good thing to identify that and start to educate your team on how to build the basics of this new type of infrastructure. Ring fence it, make sure it's a good fit for it, and let them go with it. And that'll do a lot of the work for you. You won't have everybody running around with it. You can take a simple classification problem, let the team do some R&D on it, and then you can scream and shout about it as it goes out. And you keep it controlled and start to guide people through.
Right. I think we're at an interesting point, I think, in that conversation where it's like, it's a solution, not the
exactly.
it's not the goal. You know, it's which makes me get back to, I guess it's not how do you shoehorn AI in. It's actually what business problem are you trying to solve,
Exactly.
and then we'll tell you if it's the right solution to go and enable that. But it's also a little bit chicken and egg. Is maybe they don't know what problems it could do without actually understanding the power of the tools that are available to them. Now, I don't hear many product people or business people actually talking about AI. I hear a lot of engineering people talking about AI right now.
One thing I think is undervalued is if you're under the assumption that the vast majority of smart people working on this are not in your company, which I think is probably a fair assumption for most companies, no matter how, even Google would probably be true of that. So in that situation, especially when the whole ecosystem is moving very quickly, I think getting very good at procurement for a period of time has a really good ROI. You get to see what other people are doing, you get to analyze, you get to keep on top of things, and where relevant, you can start to become an elegant purchaser of this stuff.
That top question is again there. Not something I'd even thought about, to be honest. Do you worry about the carbon intensity of generative AI? I guess it's using a lot of power, right? It's like,
yeah, I heard something the other day that something like 20% of power in the US was running on data centers now.
Wow.
Which is insane.
Yeah. Somebody will, no doubt, maybe next year we'll have a talk on the carbon footprint of your AI models. Next one as well. Does your legal background give you any insight on how the various copyright concerns about generative models and their training data is likely to play out? How do you see the courts treating it? I mean, I'm the parent of a teenager. It's rife in schools. You can tell all the homework and everything that's been generated by AI. I even saw a proposal deck go out to a client that was, and I read it and I'm like, this doesn't feel right. This language is like, it feels a bit clunky. Hey, ChatGPT, did you write this? Oh, yes, you did. Like, it's everywhere. I guess you've got a particularly unique perspective as well with that legal background and what you're doing. What are your thoughts on that whole copyright model then?
Well, yes, I think the other bit that's also being alluded to there is on the data that people are feeding in, and then because I think that the general argument that the models are making right now is that I, as a human, am free to read the internet, and then at the end of it, you don't own my brain. Like, I'm just consuming that information, and just because I read Wikipedia doesn't mean that if I factor Wikipedia into my thinking, that suddenly the output of my work next week needs to have a royalty to Wikipedia, right? Now, I think where that's going to fall down is that in law, basically, the simple principles of your ownership of something is your right to protect its access and destroy it. And what I think will probably happen is that anybody that has a data set that significantly improves the performance of one of these models, it's just going to restrict access until they get paid.
Okay.
So I think that the theory of like copyright and all this, certainly I think a lot of foundation models have sort of got away with it now because no one was ready for this. But now anybody that can and will is just going to put up the gates and say, that's all good, just have to pay me, otherwise you can't do it.
Right.
Which is why I think Stack Overflow had a partnership with OpenAI last week. There would be money in the background for that because, and Reddit, one of the greatest sources. So these guys are just going to stop the models. They're going to probably have an AI.txt file like robots.txt for SEO. They just say, no, you can't touch this.
Okay. What about regulatory changes as well? Are we expecting much to come, do you think?
I think that's going to be the bigger problem. Right. I think that as much as people in our businesses don't understand it, people that aren't in tech companies, especially, maybe are further from it. And there's such a panic that, I think I saw this post from like a commissioner of the EU a few months ago, and he just had a big pie chart that just said like countries in the world or like, whatever that have regulated AI, like just the EU, like, ugh. It's like, what does that mean? Like, and there's just this knee jerk that they feel like they need to do something. They're going to just throw something at it. And my experience, if you don't regulate eloquently, you just create, like the cookie banner being a good example. I suspect we're going to end up with cookie banner on steroids,
Well, we all look forward to that.
Yeah, exactly. I hope everyone's ready to click OK.
Your data is going to be used in an AI model. Click. Yeah.
Google search and 3 screens and nuts, yeah.
Cool. So we touched on the developer productivity angle. We touched on the product itself. Reminds me, what was the third pillar that you talked about around using
So I think the big one for me is really how people interact
Okay.
with what having great natural language means for products and services, because it's actually it touches not just engineering, it's a design, it's a product problem, it's everything else. You know?
So what are you seeing that then? I hate it. Is everybody else like just purposely rude to a chatbot, or is that just?
Yeah. We all hated. I don't know. But
are you saying I'm not going to be able to tell in the future if I'm speaking to it?
Well, I don't know. I think if you think about what you hated about the chat experience, it's that it was incredibly unhuman. It was slow, it was stupid, it was brittle, it hit edge cases, and very quickly you're just like, I just want to speak to a human, please, straight away. And the more...
Say please.
Yeah, exactly. I think that where this stuff is now beginning to get to is, especially with things like Grok, this new platform in the US, that they're now running these models in 200-300 milliseconds rather than 15 seconds. And then if you look at the latency that they're beginning to get on the interaction, it's not far away from the experience that you and I are having now in terms of interaction speed and response times. That has got to have an impact on how people are going to interact with our services, because it is so much more friction to go and open your phone and type in a PIN code and find the app and then wait for it to load and then type in this, rather than just string a few words together and ask for something.
Right.
So if you think about how big a shift that is for your user experience, there are going to be entirely new categories of companies that move in to start to disintermediate old ones, and I think it's going to be a big reshuffle mainly on that, rather than all the other bits down below.
I think I saw, other people might have seen it as well, at LinkedIn post doing the rounds of a recruiter that was training a chat model essentially to do the screening, so that you would have an interview with a bot to do the screening, and it's like, great, so you don't even get to speak to a person. In which case then as a candidate, can you also go program a bot to go and touch the other one and go do the and where does it end? But I guess it doesn't just change the interaction with your product, but that changes society. It's like how
we're seeing it already. So one of the big reasons, one of the big use cases that we have is that you get lots of high volume communications, and hidden within that there are things that have legal implications. Like maybe in your customer support phone there's something that if you don't deal with it you get a $200K fine.
Right.
Now what we're beginning to see is that on the flip side, other actors are starting to use Gen AI to spit and feed stuff into the human agents that's blocking them up and causing a ton of issues. So it's almost like a counterattack that you need to on your side. And so I think to a degree we're actually going to need to embrace a bit of it as a counter-terrorist weapon to a lot of the things that are being created on the other side.
Right. I see this pendulum swinging back and forth for a while then, which probably means we will have lots more talks around AI for the next few years at conferences, I'm afraid. We are just about out of time, so we'll wrap up. How do you want to wrap up for people then? Where should they go? How do they follow up? How do they learn more? How do they get involved?
I think there's too much going around, really. I honestly am a big fan of it. The best thing that you can do is go and get your hands dirty and go and build something very simple in the space and just start to use. There's so many good tools out there now that you can start to plug together basic pipelines. And I just think there's a whole new set of concepts that no matter what happens in the space, if you're an engineer, go and just learn how the spanner works.
Right.
Make basic pipelines, do it on your local machine, just learn how vectors and embeddings and all of this stuff really so that you can understand when there is a situation to hit it, you're just better equipped. And I think that's the most practical way to move forward without wasting a ton of effort.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Ross, for saying that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.